Chapter 24 Hunted. After freezing in quarantine all night, Louis was led into a vast compound. As he entered his barracks, a POW slipped a cup of hot tea into his chilled hands. Another ladled in 2 heaping teaspoons of sugar from a sock. To POW, sugar was a priceless treasure. Louis was amazed that this man had a sock full of it. As he sipped his tea, 2 officers, Englishman Tom Wade and American Bob Martindale, told him about Amori. In the year he'd spent in a Funa interrogation camp, Louis had longed to be sent to a POW camp, where he believed he'd be well treated. That morning, he learned the truth. Amori, like most Japanese POW camps, was a slave camp. The 1929 Geneva Convention, an international agreement concerning POWs, allowed detaining countries to use prisoners for labor. But the workers had to be healthy, they were to be paid, and the work couldn't be dangerous, unreasonably difficult, or connected to war operations. To ensure that POW officers retained authority over their men, they couldn't be forced to work. Japan signed the agreement, but their government never ratified it. Japan mocked the Geneva Convention, enslaving POWs to support its war effort, forcing them into labor so harsh they died by the thousands. For some 11 hours a day, 7 days a week, Amori's POWs slaved at docks, rail yards, warehouses, and a coal yard. Each rail yard slave lifted as much as 30 tons of goods a day. The only aspect of the Geneva Convention that the Japanese sometimes heeded was the prohibition on forcing POW officers to work. Compounding the hardship was the diet. Rations were meager and of terrible quality and nutritive value. About once a week, a wheelbarrow arrived bearing meat. Spread over some 900 men, servings were consisting of things like horse intestines and dog parts. Malnutrition-related diseases were epidemic, as was explosive diarrhea. The benjo latrine boogie, which led men to swallow lumps of coal to slow the digestive waterfall. For unenslaved officers and men too sick to work, rations were halved. Ailing, overworked, and malnourished, many men weighed less than 90 pounds. The saving grace of Amori was the guards. There were a few rogues, but several were kind. The rest were indifferent, enforcing the rules with blows but behaving predictably. There was one enormous exception, Corporal Watanabe. Martindale and Wade were quick to warn Louis about the corporal. He was, they said, a tyrant. He loved to send guards bursting into a barracks ahead of him screaming, "Kari!" then race in to choose a man to beat. Sometimes he leapt through open windows, because Watanabe eavesdropped on the men and beat those who mentioned him. Louis was told to speak of him in whispers and refer to him by his nickname, the Bird. To get almost anywhere in camp, POWs had to walk within view of the Bird's office. The Bird demanded that men salute the office, even if he wasn't there. He often hid nearby, baseball bat in hand, ready to club men who didn't salute. The POWs devised an elaborate sentry system to monitor his movements. The code phrases like, "the animal is on the prowl." Men were so attuned to him that they instantly recognized the clopping of his clogs, a sound that usually triggered a stampede to the benjos, where the Bird seldom went. When prisoners arrived at a POW camp, they were registered with the Red Cross, which forwarded news of their whereabouts to their governments. But Amori officials didn't register Louis. They had special plans for him and wanted to keep his presence secret. The American government was told nothing, and because the Bird burned the letters POWs wrote, Louis couldn't tell his family he was alive. The warnings about the Bird did no good. When Louis' Bird found him, accused him of imaginary and attacked him in a wild fury. The next day came another beating, and the next, and another. The corporal was fixated on Louis, hunting the man he would call number one prisoner. When Louis woke each morning, his first thought was of the Bird. He looked for the corporal through morning roll call, farting at the emperor and forcing down rations. When the slaves were marched away, Louis had no crowds to hide in. The Bird was on him immediately. The one good thing about being an officer in Amori was the exemption from slave labor, though at the painful cost of half the ration. But after Louis' arrival, the Bird lined the officers up and announced he was sending them into slavery at the work sites. When the first officer said this violated the Geneva Convention, the bird swung his kendo stick into the man's head. The next man also refused. He too was clubbed. Louis was the third man. Trying to avoid getting his head cracked open, he blurted out an idea. They love to work within the camp, he said, making it a better place. The bird paused, considering. Then he marched them to the 8 Benjo pits, oozing over with waste of 900 men with diarrhea. From now on, he said, they be Benjo slaves, scooping the waste and carrying it to a cess pit. Louis and the others were horrified, but they had no choice. Every day they labored in the waste, sickened and degraded, while the bird stood by. To deprive him of the pleasure of seeing them miserable, they made a point of being jolly. Each evening, the enlisted slaves trudged back to the camp. The first time Louis saw them return, he learned where the sock of sugar had come from. Amori's POW slaves were waging a guerrilla war against Japan. At rail yards, they switched mailing labels, sending tons of goods to the wrong destinations. They threw dirt into gas tanks, finding the suitcases of the Nazi envoy. They shredded the clothes, soaked them in mud and oil, and repacked them with notes signed Winston Churchill. They peed on nearly every bag of rice they loaded. In one incident, POWs loading heavy goods onto a barge hurled the material down with such force that they sank the barge, blocking a canal. After an epic effort was put into clearing the sunken barge and bringing in a new one, the POWs sank it too. When the rail yard foreman became absorbed in wooing a pretty girl, the POWs dashed to the truck, wrenched with pins and bolts out, and rushed back to their work. A train chugged onto the sabotage strip. The rail shot out from under it, and the entire train tipped over. No one was hurt, but the Japanese were frantic. They looked to the POWs, who kept working, faces blank. The Japanese screamed accusations at each other. But the POWs couldn't sabotage. They broke into boxes, lifted warehouse doors off the hinges, raided galleys, and crawled up fast chutes. Scottish POWs who worked in a sugar warehouse ran the most sophisticated operation. They knitted 4-foot-long socks and hoarded hollow reeds. And when the Japanese took shoe sizes for work boots, ordered giant boots. At the warehouse, they stabbed one end of each reed into a sugar sack, then ran the other end into their huge socks, allowing sugar to pour through until the socks were full. Others tied up their pant cuffs, stuck the reeds in their waistbands, and their pants with sugar. Each evening, walking in, clothes packed with booty. During inspection, while the guards' backs were, men would deftly pass stolen food or the men bearing it around. The biggest trick was hiding the POWs who arrived staggering drunk after chugging down stolen alcohol. The drunks were shuffled to the center and braced between sober men so they wouldn't be pitched face first into the guards. In the barracks, Louis watched the men unpack. Sugar-filled socks hung from necks, under armpits, down pant legs. Salmon emerged from sleeves. Oyster cans from boots, leg leaves, which Louis helped hide in secret wall compartments. And once dried, shred into smoke pits. One American built a secret compartment in his canteen, filling the bottom with alcohol, while the top, upon inspection, yielded water. One group stole the makings of a cake, only to discover upon baking it that the flour was cement. Thieves were often caught, and when they were, all slaves were beat butts. But the men were fed so hard that they had to steal. They set up a university of thievery. Professors, the best thieves, taught the art of stealing. Japanese caught thieves, POW officers suggested that the culprits be transferred to work sites where there was nothing stealable. The Japanese agreed, and the inept thieves were replaced with University of Thievery alumni. A black market of stolen goods flourished, and many men, there wasn't a lot to go around, but everyone benefited. Food, especially the Scotch sugar, was the camp currency. The sugar barons became the rich men of Amori, often hiring assistants to do their laundry, but they donated a fourth of their loot to sick and starving POWs, including Louis. Deaths from illness and malnutrition were once commonplace, but after the stealing school was created, only 2 POWs died, one from a burst appendix. And in so degrading a place, stealing won back the men's dignity. Weeks passed. The bird attacked Louis relentlessly. Unable to escape, Louis became increasing. His experience in childhood, when bullies bloodied him, was repeating itself. He lit up with rage. When the bird lunged for Louis, Louis imagined strangling him, and his hands drew into fists. He saw the corporal looking furiously at his hands, but refused to unclench them. The bird demanded that Louis look him in the eyes. Louis wouldn't do it. The bird tried to knock Louis down. Louis wouldn't fall. Other prisoners told him to give in or the bird would beat him to death. Louis couldn't do it. When he raised his eyes, all that shone in them was hate. A battle of wills had begun. All that fall, the POWs could hear air raid sirens over Tokyo. They were false alarms, but something was coming. Louis watched the sky and hoped the Americans would come before the bird killed him. That's the end of chapter 24. We will get to 25 in the future.